So ayun po So today guys, we're going to discuss about the digestive system.
Wow!
But first, I have one question. Let's start this vlog with this question. Nganong mukaon pa man kung ikalibang ra gihapon? We need energy and nutrients, boy!
Wow!
Digestive system is a system of organs responsible for getting food into and out of our body and for making use of food to keep our body healthy.
Wow!
Did you know guys that this system is considered as the most diverse and complicated system in the body, as it is comprised of 10 organs which covers 9 meters and containing over 20 plus specialized cell types, and its task is to transforming the foods we eat into nutrients and energy which can make us feel alive.
Wow!
Which contains 4 main components, namely the gastrointestinal tract, the pancreas, liver, gallbladder, the enzymes, hormones, nerves, and blood, and lastly, the mesentery. The gastrointestinal tract. It is an organ system within humans and other animals which takes in food, digests it to extract and absorbs energy and nutrients, and expels the remaining waste as feces. Next is the pancreas, liver, and gallbladder. This organ breaks down food using an array of special juices. Next is the enzymes, hormones, nerves, and blood. All of them work together just to break down the food. They modulate the digestive process, and they are the one which delivers the final products or the oxygens and nutrients. Lastly, the mesentery. It supports and positions all your digestive organs in the abdomen, which enables them to do their jobs.
Wow!
Digestion begins in the mouth. Well, before the food reaches the stomach, when we see, smell, taste, or even imagine a tasty meal, our salivary glands begin making saliva. Once the hot dog is inside the mouth, chewing combines with the sloshing saliva, turn it into a moist lump, which is the bolus. The bolus is a ball-like mixture of food and saliva that forms in the mouth during the process of chewing. A digestive enzyme in saliva called the amylase starts to break down some of the carbohydrates, which are the starches and sugars in the food, even before it leaves the mouth. From the throat, the food travels down a muscular tube in the chest called the esophagus, down which it must plunge to reach the stomach, and the nerves in the surrounding esophageal tissue sense the presence of bolus, which then trigger peristalsis, which is the waves of muscle contractions force food down through the esophagus to the stomach. And a person normally isn't aware of the movements of the esophagus, stomach, and intestine that take place as food passes through the digestive tract. At the end of the esophagus, a muscular ring or valve called a sphincter allows food to enter the stomach and then squeezes shut to keep food or fluid from flowing back up into the esophagus. The stomach muscles churn and mix the food with digestive juices that have acids and enzymes, breaking it into much smaller, digestible pieces. An acidic environment is needed for the digestion that takes place in the stomach. By the time the food is ready to leave the stomach, it has been processed into a thick liquid called the chyme, and it is ready to move to the small intestine.
Wow.
The liver sends bile to the gallbladder, which secretes it in the duodenum, the C-shaped first portion of the small intestine. So, in the jejunum, which is the cold midsection, and the ileum, which is the final section that leads into the large intestine, the dissolving of the fats floating in the slurry of chyme happens. These enzyme-rich juices break the fat molecules down into the fatty acids and glycerol for easier absorption in the body. The inner wall of the small intestine is covered with millions of microscopic finger-like projections called the villi. The villi are the vehicles through which nutrients can be absorbed into the blood. The blood then brings these nutrients to the rest of the body. So, from the small intestine, the undigested food and some water travels to the large intestine through a muscular ring or valve that prevents food from returning to the small intestine. So by the time the food reaches the large intestine, the work of absorbing nutrients is nearly finished. The large intestine's main job is to remove water from the undigested matter and form solid waste, which is the poop, to be excreted. And then, what's left is a soft mass called the stool. And the large intestine squeezes stool into the rectum, where nerves sense it's expanding and tells the body when it's time to expel the waste. And the rectum is where the feces are stored until they leave the digestive system through the anus as a bowel movement. And then, the hot dog which I ate turns into feces. Uy! Kasi ikaw junk food siya, makadawat na mo. Ma, need na ako energy. Dapat niya siya calories.
Wow.
Dapat niya siya energy. Calories in food provide energy in the form of heat so that our body can function. So there are 6 major steps of digestion. First is the eating or ingestion. It means taking in food usually via the mouth. Ingestion is the process of taking in food through the mouth, and the teeth, saliva, and the tongue play important roles in the mastication or the preparing the food into bolus. While the food is being mechanically broken down, the enzymes in saliva begin to chemically process the food as well. So next is the propulsion. It is the moving of food through the alimentary canal, including swallowing, which is initiated voluntarily, and peristalsis. In peristalsis, alternate waves of contractions and relaxation of muscles in the organ rolls, it squeezes food from one organ to the next. Some mixing occurs. So next is the mechanical breakdown, or also known as the mechanical digestion. It physically prepares food for chemical digestion by enzymes, and it includes of chewing, mixing of food with saliva, with the tongue, storing of food in the stomach, and lastly, segmentation. Segmentation or rhythmic local constructions of the intestine, it mixes food with digestive juices, and increases the efficiency of absorption by repeatedly moving different parts of the food mass over the intestinal wall. The goal of all this pulverization is to increase the surface area of that bite of food by breaking it down into increasingly tiny pieces to prepare it to more enzymes in the fourth step, which is the chemical digestion. Next is the chemical digestion. It is a series of catabolic steps in complex food molecules broken down to their chemical building blocks. It accomplished by enzymes secreted by various glands into the lumen of the alimentary canal. Enzymatic breaking down of foodstuff begins in the mouth and is accomplished in the small intestine. Mechanical and chemical digestion are two processes that occur in the digestive system, enabling digestion, absorption, and excretion of the food. The main difference between mechanical and chemical digestion is that the mechanical breakdown of large food particles into small food particles occur in the mechanical digestion, whereas the chemical breakdown of compounds with a high molecular weight into compounds with a low molecular weight occurs in the chemical digestion. Mechanical digestion occurs from mouth to the stomach, while chemical digestion occurs from mouth to the intestine. And a major part of both mechanical and chemical digestion occurs in the stomach.
Wow!
The next, guys, is the absorption. It is the passage of digested end products, vitamins, minerals, and water from lumen of the GI tract into blood or lymph. Absorption to occur first, substances must enter the muscular cells by active transport process, and small intestine is the major absorption site. Digestion allows for the absorption of those nutrients as they pass from the small intestine into the blood by both active and passive transport. And once those nutrients are absorbed by your cells, you can finally use the energy inside of them or use to build new tissues. And the goal of this entire process is the absorption of the nutrients. After all of those 5 steps, our body has sucked all the nutrients at once. Digestible substances are squirted out of our body through anus. That is defecation.
Wow!
Corophagia is the scientific name for eating feces, or also known as eating your own poop. The phases of stomach regulation. The cephalic phase of digestion is the gastric secretion that occurs even before food enters the oral cavity. It results from the visual, olfactory, and auditory inputs to the brain-induced anticipatory responses to prepare the gastrointestinal tract for the meal. The more intense is the stimulation. Next is the gastric phase. It is a period in which swallowed food and semi-digested protein peptides, and amino acids activate gastric activity. Ingested food stimulates gastric activity in two ways, by stretching the stomach and by gastric contents stimulating receptors in the stomach. And the third one is the intestinal phase. It is a stage in which the duodenum responds to arriving chyme and moderates gastric activity through hormones and nervous reflexes. The duodenum initially enhances gastric secretion but soon inhibits it. The layers of the stomach wall. So there are 4 layers of the stomach wall. First is the mucosa. It is composed of simple epithelium cells, and it is the innermost layer of the gastrointestinal tract. It is the absorptive and secretory layer of the GI tract. And next is the submucosa. It is a dense, irregular layer of connective tissue with large blood vessels, lymphatics, and nerves that supports the mucosa. And the third one is the muscularis or the muscularis externa. It consists of an inner circular muscular layer and a longitudinal outer muscular layer, and is responsible for the segmental constructions and peristaltic movements in the gastrointestinal tract. And last layer, or the fourth layer, is the serosa. It consists of a secretory epithelial layer and a thin connective tissue layer that reduce the friction from muscle movements. The types of cell in the stomach that helps in digestion. First is the parietal cell. It produces hydrochloric acid, which helps denature and change the shape of proteins to make it easier for enzymes to digest.
Wow.
Next is the chief cell. It produces pepsinogen, and it is responsible for the stomach's ability to initiate digestion of proteins.
Wow.
The third one is the enteroendocrine cell. It produces serotonin, histamine, and somatostatin. The function of serotonin and histamine is to trigger other cells to release more acid or contract muscle tissue, and the somatostatin is to inhibit secretion.
Wow.
And last is the G cells. It produces gastrin, and it stimulates the release of other gastric fluids as a stomach muscle activity.
Wow.
So ayun po mga pa. Tapos na yung vlog ko, and that's the end of my vlog for digestive system. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and click the notification bell for more videos.
Wow.
Outro. Cheng!
But they don't do shit.